right, so welcome to our May 2021 HMIS users meeting. Thanks definitely to those of you who I saw in the last meeting for joining us for another meeting. Used to be that we, when we were in person, there's a little bit more time, but we are ready to go. We're marathoning it, and happy to have you here. So we've got a couple things to update y'all on and get some feedback on. So for system updates, we want to make sure that you meet our newest staff. We have a new guide available, and we want to give you a little update on the timeline for the point in time and housing inventory count, which we've been talking about for some time. So very exciting stuff there. And then in kind of our training, how can we help section, we really wanted to respond to some feedback and corrections that we saw during the PIT-HIC period. And so we really want to clarify some key portions: project start date for different project types, and the housing moving date. We have a little bit of support for that planned as well. And then we can look at our calendar. If there's anything that's come up that you'd like to troubleshoot or demo, I'm happy to do that. We should have a little bit of time at the end to take your questions. Definitely, if you've had a question, someone else has as well. Probably I have had that same question at some point, so really encourage you to share those as they come up. All right, well, let's get going with some system updates. So we've introduced this over the last couple months a little bit, but we're just wanted to kind of make sure that you can put a face to the name of one of our newest help desk staff, Tanya Harris. Tanya, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit as our newest ICA partner?
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here and nice to meet, so to speak, all of you. I am new with the data center since I think February 1st. Very excited to be here. I currently live in Virginia, and I have been a system administrator using ServicePoint for the last 16 years. So I bring to you a lot of experience and look forward to working with you all. Thanks.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, definitely really appreciate your technical experience with our sometimes touchy software, sometimes excellent tools to change. Yeah, definitely really appreciate that. And yeah, both Katie and Tanya had quite the onboarding right in the middle of PIT-HIC. So I think you probably heard from one or the other during that and help desk replies, but you'll definitely see them around as we continue to work on making sure things work for y'all. So really appreciate having Tanya and the chance to have her introduce herself. Yeah. Did I see it? Oh no. Cool. All right. Let's see. Okay, let's here. Next update. Okay. Quick update on a new tool for you. We had talked a little bit about the history color bar in HMIS and ServicePoint for point in time and housing inventory count corrections, but it's really a useful tool all year round for reviewing responses for clients and potentially making corrections, even outside of that federal reporting period. And so what this bar does is it allows us to kind of dig deep in a single question, a single data element, and see who and what was entered before. So we have a guide, kind of PDF written guidance with screenshots on our training and knowledge page online, and that will hopefully help support exploring that feature and just being able to coordinate even better between projects and between agencies. I think with sharing being introduced in orange, the color bar, the history color bar, can be a really great tool for coordination and, you know, seeing when a response was entered here, there, and kind of the layers, that archaeology, so to speak, there. So here is the link. I'm going to put that in chat. It's also going to be hyperlinked in the slides here. And yeah, we can definitely talk more about that at another meeting if you'd like, but just wanted to let you know that's a new guide available. Any questions around that before we go on? Okay, cool. And so we have talked a lot about PIT and HIC, point in time housing inventory count. I wanted to give you an update on how we're doing. Remember, this is the one night count of folks experiencing homelessness and also the estimated resources in our community. This year it was January 27th. In a few months, but it takes a robust effort to make sure that we've got everything lined up and accurate to submit to HUD. And right now we're doing the final reviews. The CSC and the data center are doing final reviews about to submit that to HUD. So haven't quite pressed the button to submit, but it is on its way, and we really appreciate all of your help. And especially your patience as we kind of, you know, dug deeper and deeper, maybe found a couple things that needed some follow-up. So really appreciate you sticking with us through that process. Let's see, I think that this is also an opportunity to kind of think back on what we did for point in time and housing inventory count. The data center ran reports, and then your agency admins had access to those to review, maybe share internally, and then submit those once they've been reviewed or corrected. Do you all have feedback about that process? Did that work for you? Is it do you have any suggestions on how to make that better? Yeah, Jessica. I see it.
I mean, it was my first time doing it, so it was just interesting. It was a lot of good communication there. And so
okay, so definitely communication's good, but
yes.
I think, is it like all of the, you know, being the AA for so many different programs, you get a lot of emails about different projects. I don't know if
yeah, that's that, and this is my first, you know, it'll be a year in July that it'll be, you know, I'm here with IFC, and so just learning in general everything. And Stephanie's been a big, I mean, A1 helper, and Tracy and Katira were really helpful, and Nicole and you, everyone was, you know, but it's just a process of learning what to do, how to do it, and then also all the programs and making sure that before I submitted it, having to go back, and you know, it's tedious. It's just a lot. Next year, I'll be more acclimated into the process, so it'll be easier. But yeah, the way you and Nicole and I communicated was really helpful, though, in explaining things, and yeah, so that was helpful.
We appreciate that. Hopefully, it'll just get better from here. All right. Well, as you're thinking about it, as you're recovering from a very long winter, feel free to send us your insights and feedback you have any. So definitely appreciate all of your hard work on this. It was an intense few months, right? What a first year, Jessica, for you to have. We had the 2 LSA years back to back, September, October, November, then straight into system performance measures, and then straight into point-in-time housing inventory counts. So this is definitely, I think, the longest stretch of federal reports that we've had since I've been here in like 5 years. And that was not the best gift from HUD for a pandemic year. We're adapting. We won't have quite as hard a time this year. Hopefully some reports are settling down a little bit. They're going to be more consistent. But I want to just acknowledge that was a real marathon from a data and HMIS side. All right, let's, before we turn to this next section, let me see what y'all think about this. Okay, I have a poll for you, just to make sure we can stretch our minds a little bit. Wondering what's the best kind of pickle? All right, someone is choosing the ew option. Appreciate it. I understand. It's not vinegar. It's not for everyone. That's great. All right. Well, we've got a clear winner. I'll let you one more chance to get it in if you want. All right, we're wrapping that up. And clear winner. We are a decisive group. We are dill, pickle, enthusiast. So there's some in this group. So interesting to see what there is consensus around in the community. I appreciate you jumping in there. That'll be a little bit of practice for later on. Right. So let's talk a little bit about enrollment and when does enrollment start for our HMIS projects. This goes by many names: enrollment, project start, intake, and I think it's helpful to just recognize that there are some different names for this, but we're talking about that intake. When do you start recording a client's initial status in the system? Oh, I missed one. Entry assessment. That's also another one. We'll try to be consistent with project start here. And this really impacts all clients, right? We can't even begin to evaluate the outcomes of our services, the experience of the client, if we don't know that we're serving them. So this really does apply to everyone. And it really is a snapshot in time. It's not necessarily something that will be updated unless it's a correction. So a way to think about that is kind of taking a picture of the client, taking that snapshot. What's their context? What's their experience when they first arrive at your project? And if there are changes that occur, then that happens through a different action, those interim updates. And just to keep it exciting, this is a little bit different for each project type. So it depends on what kind of services you're providing, what are your main services, kind of in HUD's different criteria. All of that informs when a client's project start date should be. All right, and yes, definitely all clients. Okay, so let's go through a little bit of the differences here. And now we have, it's very exciting. In Orange County, we've got street outreach, we've got rapid rehousing, we've got everything in between. There's different partners in the community, so we want to know, how are they measuring their engagement with the client? So first up, the street outreach. This is really looking at when there's a first contact between the client and the outreach worker. And this can be a hard one, right? Because what it's trying to do is recognize that street outreach is such a different set of services than a lot of the other ones, like residential homeless projects. That street outreach, you're really building a relationship with folks that have been maybe had some adverse experiences with other service providers that have potentially, maybe not, but potentially been isolated. And so that has a different relationship building and a different trajectory for you and the client. And so to track that, to measure how that's going, street outreach should record project start at first contact. Our next project type is a residential homeless project, like shelter or transitional housing. In our community, that's Homestar and Community House. And this is really measured by the core service of the project, which is that sheltering, right? Is providing that bed for a client. So these projects measure the first night the client sleeps in the bed. I really think about it as, when does their head hit the pillow, right? Where are they laying their head at night? And permanent housing includes rapid rehousing, apologies on the typo there, but rapid rehousing, RRH, permanent supportive housing. And homeless prevention is kind of a weird one, but it kind of straddles permanent housing and all of it. Permanent housing is really looking at when it's a little more nuanced. It's when a client is eligible, accepts the offer of services, and the services are available. And so what this definition is really trying to think about is this actually a service, a program that's accessible to the client? Just because sometimes, or often, most of the time, always, permanent housing resources, there's just not enough to go around. And so really distinguishing who you're delivering services to and who you're not is important for measuring your program's outcomes. So this is really about those three different things: eligibility, are you able to serve the client with available services, and they also need to accept it, right? They can decline that. So it's a key part as well. And then other project types like supportive services only, I would put coordinated entry in this too. That's really about the first services delivered to a client. All right, we are gonna meet Henrietta, but are there any questions before we look at some examples with our state client, Henrietta? Okay, so far so good. All right, so let's test your knowledge a little bit then. So when we're looking at, we're going to go through Henrietta's experience in the community through a couple different project types. So let's first start off with street outreach, critical intervention here. And Henrietta had first contact on May 1st of last year. She was able to ask for and get some medical supplies on the 4th, a few days later, some hygiene supplies the next day, and that relationship was, built a little bit more. And a week after first contact, on her 4th contact, she actually created a case plan with the outreach worker and signed the ROI. So, thinking about this, what is the right start date for Henrietta? All right, we're going to use the polling situation here to help us think about this. So for street outreach, which one of these four is the right date for project start. And then it won't let you submit unless you answer the second question too, which is what is the date of engagement? Now, this is a little bit harder. It didn't preview that one. But street outreach has a specific element where they need to record a date of engagement to distinguish folks that they just, meet, but maybe you don't even get a full name, right? Sometimes that relationship just isn't going to build all the way. And so the date of engagement kind of helps you measure that relationship a little bit differently, depending on how engaged the client is. So that's a key data element for street outreach projects. All right, it's been a minute, so I will end this. Okay, and all right, awesome. So we have the majority of us are correct. So the first contact is going to be the project start date for street outreach. So that's really critical when you are talking whether you're a street outreach worker yourself or when you're talking in the community and you hear someone is entered in street outreach, or maybe you see it in HMIS because of sharing. You want to know that might not mean a very close connection. You really want to also see if there's a date of engagement, if that's available, or if you can talk to a street outreach worker about, is this client actually engaged? The date of engagement is that fourth contact in this example where there's that kind of deeper engagement. They've created a case plan, they've signed the ROI. This is when all of the intake questions must be completed by as a date of engagement. So street outreach workers, they actually get a little bit more time to collect some of those universal data elements than other projects. All right, and I will take that down. So any questions about that after seeing those answers? All right, yeah, so street outreach workers, they have a little bit more time, but it's also a kind of different relationship with the client, right? All right, let's go to our next project type, residential homeless projects, shelter or transitional housing. So we've got 3 different options here. Henrietta has been working with the street outreach worker, and now she has requested shelter. A couple days later, on the 4th of June, she's actually able to sleep in that bed. And her first meeting with the case in-house case management is the next day, June 5th. So what is the correct start date out of these 3 options? And I'm hoping you can move the poll around so you can still see the slide potentially. Let me know if this is. All right, awesome. Boom, 100% correct. That's excellent, thank you. So for our shelters and transitional housing projects, that is going to be when the client lays their head down at night. All right, so let's continue with Henrietta on her journey. So yes, sorry, there's the affirmative, sleeps in bed. Okay, so next on her journey, she is now being referred to permanent housing. So later in June, she gets a referral to permanent housing. There's an eligibility interview. There's some case conferencing in early July. Hopefully, it takes different amounts of time to connect folks to services, right? So this is just trying to illustrate that. So by July 5th, we've got a case conferencing, and she accepts the referral. And then a couple days later, she has her first housing search meeting for those housing search services. So given these options, what is going to be the project start date for permanent housing? So there's referral, eligibility, case conferencing, housing search. All right, real fast on this one, y'all. And everyone, very confident. Yes, that is exactly right. So we want to make sure that the client's eligible, but we also need to make sure that there's that this referral is right. And so that might be the case conferencing meeting or talking to the client for that acceptance of the services. Awesome, y'all are just tearing through these. Excellent. Okay, so that is exactly right. So the date here, just to specify, that would be July 5th. So part of her journey is still being recorded because of, her shelter stay, right? So it's not that we're missing information here. We're just kind of drawing the line of when the project, the permanent housing project, is focusing on the client, is really working towards those positive outcomes, and being held accountable for those too. So you want to make sure you've got the right start date. Oh, whoa! All right, a little upset there. So another way that permanent housing projects kind of engage with the whole client referral process is maybe you're getting a referral and you actually can see that shelter entry at the shelter. So just a slightly different way for permanent housing projects to receive a client, and kind of inserting in here coordinated entry. So that coordinated entry assessment may happen after a client reaches the shelter, or maybe they're directly calling the helpline, but then that journey is continuing from there. So sorry, in this example, Henrietta has slept at the shelter. She got the assessment, maybe the VIs for that. I think we're still using that. A few days later, on the 14th, and then in early July, she can actually accept and access rapid rehousing services. And then she has a meeting shortly after for housing search. And this is definitely a little trickier. All right, last vote. I'm going to end the polling. Okay, so yes, this is still when the client has accepted and can access those services. The coordinated entry assessment is going to assist with eligibility, right? It's going to assist connecting people to the right resource, but that's not when the permanent housing provider really takes on that client, right? That's going to be when they've accepted. All right. Okay, let's go on. So our last project type category is all other, but this includes coordinated entry. And this, it's not last because we don't care about it. It's last because coordinated entry projects are a little newer than outreach, shelter, rapid rehousing. It just developed a little bit later in the history of the system. So when we're looking through this perspective, we've got a different kind of journey for Henrietta for services. So Henrietta is presenting for services. The next day she's able to connect about a meal. Maybe there's a class about a month later, and some financial assistance is available, but it takes a little bit to connect there. Maybe there's a different different process, different availability of that funding for utility assistance. And so for these kind of supportive services only, these services only projects, what is the correct start date? All right, this. So out of those four options, what would be the start date for a project that is specifically for services? isn't given a, a night stay for the night, isn't doing those tenant supportive services. All right. And y'all are absolutely right. So that first date, 5/1, when she presents for services, is going to be that start date. So that's the first call to the helpline. That's whenever they present first for other supportive services projects, that's going to be your start date. Absolutely. All right, excellent job. Excellent job, y'all. And just a reminder, there are paper forms that can help with data collection. On the paper assessment, it's going to be the date at the very top, the date of data collection. That's where you're going to record the start date. And so this is really just trying to help help you stay organized and collect all that data entry. And that's available at our website or the ESG website if you're an ESG grantee. All right. Well, I hope that was encouraging. We had a lot of good answers there. So that's great that y'all are really doing your due diligence and getting the accurate dates for folks. Again, we just came out of another meeting where we were really looking at the length of time someone experiences homelessness in the community, and this project start date is key for that. If we're not getting project start date right, then it's really hard to have the accurate count of days that they're in your program, in the community seeking services, and just what their experience is. So really appreciate your attention to detail there. All right, what's the housing move-in date? So let's go into our next training support section. Now here, we're not going to spend too much time explaining what is a housing move-in date, but hopefully when you saw that question, an answer immediately appeared in your mind. So we want to just make sure that this is like the game-changing question, right, in HMIS. This is one of the most important data elements. I'd say it's this one and exit destination, because what we're trying to do is support people ending that experience of homelessness, having some housing stability, and this signifies that. This is one of the most important outcomes in the system. So it's really key to make sure that we're recording it correctly in HMIS. And so housing move-in date, this is just when a client moves in and begins to sleep in a unit. This can definitely be a process, especially if folks have stayed outside for a while. And so that can make this a little bit tricky, but we're just trying to get the most accurate date possible on when someone is actually sleeping in a unit. And you'll notice that's not a lease signing date. So that's really more about when the client is staying there. The other key thing is who doesn't collect this information. So it's really important to know whose responsibility this is in the community and who's not responsible for that. So shelters, prevention, transitional housing, those supportive services projects, not going to collect that housing move-in date. So definitely our permanent housing providers. All right. So what we found during the last few months, the marathon of federal reporting, was especially for point-in-time and housing inventory counts. It was hard, and we saw some patterns across permanent housing projects that housing move-in date wasn't quite consistently added. It wasn't as timely as other data, and there was some inconsistency around when to not have a housing move-in date, when to exit a client for things like eviction. So sometimes our clients are going to need multiple rounds of move-in, and there really can only be one housing move-in date per entry in HMIS. And so HUD has guidance around when a client should be exited and immediately re-entered to show that you're rehousing them again. And so there's just some special circumstances around that. We want to make sure that folks are supported, particularly in our permanent housing projects. And so we are tentatively holding June 8th. Let me know if that, oh, that's the conference, isn't it? That's not going to work as the date. Okay, that was tentative. It is now less tentative. We will find a date in early June that is going to work for technical assistance. What we want to do is have a virtual meeting with permanent housing providers. We really request all users to attend from those permanent housing providers, and then we can follow up with AAs for more support. Definitely will be recorded. We know we can't all get to the same meeting, but we will do our best to get that, make that convenient for folks. And again, I just realized reading this out loud that June 8th is actually a bad date for North Carolina to have another virtual meeting because we have a virtual conference from DHHS. So we're going to put a pin in that. I will revise that to just early June. Okay, yeah, so we want to make sure that there's some technical assistance specifically for permanent housing providers, and we'll be following up before the next Orange User meeting. So keep an eye out for that, and that saves the date. All right, so if we're looking at what's next, what's very exciting is what's not next, which is federal reporting. So we are really looking pretty good for federal reporting in terms of those big COC reporting periods. We have a little bit of a break before the next longitudinal system analysis towards fall. So we have finished point in time count. That was on the 27th of January. We're wrapping up that reporting. And our next event is June 7th for our next Orange Users meeting. And then we're just going to hold early June. I'll send out a specific date and time for that housing move-in date technical assistance for permanent housing providers. And then I believe that we usually cancel community meetings for Orange County in July. So that was going to be Monday the 5th. That may be the day that is celebrated for 4th of July. I'm not quite sure, but I think that will be canceled. Do you all know if you're getting the Monday the 5th off this year? I think that's the one. So if something different happens, because we could move it, but I think we'll probably just cancel that for July. And then just the next really big heads up is the annual privacy training requirements that happen in September. So those are kind of our next big deadlines, and we will be working on some other support in the meantime, including that housing move-in date TA. All right. Well, any other questions, concerns? Things you just really want to talk about in June? Different condiments? All right. All right. Okay, and so if this is a great time now, we can demonstrate anything in the system. If you're not quite sure how to run a report, any particular report, or you got a tricky client situation, happy to review that now. Take your topics. All right, barring that, I'm going to stop recording for us. And thank you so much for joining us today.